Good morning, everyone. Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. Overnight, Israel says that they conducted an additional 250 strikes, mostly in and around Gaza. Those strikes, they say, resulted in the death of 5 Hamas high-value targets. They say Madhath Mubashar, the commander of the Western Khan Yunis Battalion, was killed, as was Rafat Abbas, the commander of the Darj Tafa Battalion. His deputy, Ibrahim Jadava, was also killed, as was Tarek Maruf, the commander of combat and administrative assistance. And finally, Shadi Baroud, the deputy head of Hamas's intelligence department, was announced killed by Israel yesterday. Now, from what I've seen, Baroud's death would mark the most significant Hamas leadership figure thus far killed by Israel since October 7th. Now, I have seen some of these data points getting conflated recently, so it's worth diving into this. We'll use yesterday's data as an example. So 250 strikes. Israel says they carried out 250 strikes, and then they gave the names of 5 Hamas members that were killed. I have seen some folks say that that means that out of 250 strikes, Israel was only able to kill 5 Hamas fighters. That's not the right way to read this. So Israel is only putting out the names of the known leadership figures that they kill. So if it's a random Hamas militant, low-level fighter, right, that comes out of a tunnel, loads up and launches a rocket, it's identified by Israeli aircraft, a strike occurs, and they kill 5 of them, those names aren't coming out. They're just Hamas fighters that were killed. Israel probably doesn't know the names of all of the low-level fighters across Gaza. So 250 strikes, 5 high-value targets killed, but it is safe to assume that a significant additional number of Hamas militants were killed during those strikes. Now, shifting over to the Palestinian side, I have not seen any additional updates in terms of casualty counts in the last 24 hours since this graphic was released by Al Jazeera. But the Gaza Health Ministry did put out a pretty substantial document with over 7,000 names, individual IDs, and the ages of everyone that they say has been killed so far by Israeli airstrikes. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know the authenticity of this document just from what we've seen so far. What it looks like is the Gaza Health Ministry has come under a little scrutiny recently of people saying that they're unreliable and their data can't be trusted. And it looks like in response to that, they said, fine, here's the data. Here's the evidence. Every single individual person that we have said is killed, here's their name, age, and individual ID. Of course, the next step is somebody's probably going to, that has the resources and the ability to do this, dive into that document to verify its authenticity. Now, for the second night in a row, the Israeli Defense Forces conducted a ground raid into Gaza. This one, again, included tanks, armored fighting vehicles, as well as engineering equipment. The videos that have come out so far look like it's roughly the same size as what we saw the night prior. Again, the idea here probably is to test Hamas's defenses, maybe keep them on their toes, right? Hamas knows and expects that this ground offensive is going to come at some point. And if Israel is able to continue to kind of prod the defenses and make it look like this thing might be kicking off, it's another sleepless night for Hamas, maybe forcing these guys out of the tunnels to defensive positions, and then nothing actually happens. Now, it's worth noting that Hamas did not address this raid in their media. They didn't announce the one yesterday either. Nothing even saying that it was repelled. Usually you see something like that. Even if Israel goes in and comes back out, you'll see something about how it was repelled and fought off, whatever it might be. Nothing. What Hamas did say is that they thwarted an amphibious landing where they were able to capture Israeli ammunition that was left behind by the raiding party. So it's worth noting right now that this is something we're going to see more and more of as the fighting, once this ground offensive kicks off, is in a perfect world, we would have an Israeli explanation of an event and a Hamas explanation of an event. The story from the two sides. We're not going to get that. From time to time we will, and it'll help us understand the fight. But for the most part, it's going to be just like this. Israel says they conducted an operation. Hamas does not reference it, and Hamas says that they stopped Israel in another location that Israel doesn't mention at all. So just the nature of the fog of war is what we're getting into here. Now, shifting over to the Islamic State Hamas connection, Islamic State for the first time this week recognized that there's fighting going on in Gaza, and they gave instructions to their followers all around the world. And it's not good. More on that in a second. Now, stepping back as a little baseline here, we talked about this before. Islamic State looks down on Hamas. Right? They view them as apostates, lesser than. And in this publication, they don't even call Hamas by name. Right? If anything, they talk about Palestinians. They don't even want to give Hamas press time. Right? So in the article, they say that the Jews have not yet lived through the Holocaust. To give you an idea of just what they're calling for. They're inciting violence around the world, right? So this publication, it got pulled down from all different corners of the internet. What Islamic State has done is kind of cut it out into pieces and try to spread it through different arenas, but it's inciting violence, inciting hate. They say that it's not enough to just fight the Jews in Palestine, but around the world, and called on attacks in Jewish neighborhoods in the United States and Europe. They also called on countries bordering Israel to attack, saying the time is now. And then they suggested that those defending inside of Gaza need to prepare explosive belts for the defenders. So prepping suicide devices for when the Israeli Defense Forces eventually push into Gaza. Then, of course, they wrap up with the standard thing that gets Islamic State in trouble all the time. They say, also, don't forget to attack the apostate Arab countries in the region. So they just can't help themselves, right? Islamic State does not have any nations that really back them. And this is one of the reasons why. Like, no nation is fully in line with what Islamic State wants. So they're going after the Israelis. They're going after Jewish populations around the world. And then at the last minute, they just can't help themselves. Make sure you attack every single other country because they don't really align with what we want. Now, we continue to see an increase in activity between U.S. and Iranian-backed forces in the Middle East. Since October 17th, the Department of Defense says that 19 separate attacks have been carried out on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria by Iranian-backed militias. In response, yesterday, the U.S. conducted strikes on 2 locations near Bukamal in eastern Syria used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and affiliated groups in response to attacks on U.S. personnel in the region. The DoD said that these locations were identified to be struck because they were used to store munitions that were used in those attacks against U.S. bases. As of this report, we've got no real data on the effect of those strikes in terms of buildings destroyed or casualties, nothing formally from the United States, Iran, or any of those proxy forces in Syria. So here's the deal with these strikes. Iranian-backed militias striking U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria is nothing new. It's been happening for a long time. The U.S. retaliating by striking Iranian-backed militias in Iraq or Syria is nothing new. That's been happening for a long time. It's just this tit for tat between the U.S. and Iranian proxy forces. It's just kind of how it is. That doesn't mean that it's right or that that's what it should be, but that's kind of the norm and has been the norm for quite a while. So by itself, don't look at that and say the U.S. is about to go to war with Iran because we struck some of their militias. We've been striking their militias for a long time. But in the broader context of what we're seeing in the Middle East right now, every little thing has the potential for escalation. Doesn't mean it will, just has the potential, right? So we're kind of on a knife's edge waiting to see what happens. What happens when Israel goes into Gaza? How will Hezbollah respond? How will Syria respond? The Houthis seem to be chomping at the bit to get involved to help Iran. Didn't really see that one coming. What will Iran do across the region? So there's a lot of uncertainty. So every little strike like this, even if it was normal 3 months ago, has the potential to turn this war into something larger. So a fun fact, Russia and Israel have actually been pretty decent allies for quite a while. Not as close as China and Russia or North Korea and Russia, but pretty warm relationship, all things considered. It wasn't all bad, and that seems to be changing. It's just we're in this period of time where it seems like anything the United States and Russia do has to be directly opposite of what the other party's doing. Just where we are right now. So in light of this, after the United States has sent all of our officials to Israel over the past couple weeks, Russia decided to host Hamas officials in Moscow on Thursday. They said that they, according to TASS, Russian media, they said that the meeting focused on the release of foreign hostages, including some of the Russian citizens that were in Gaza. And shortly after, Hamas released a statement saying that the talks focused on Israeli aggression in Gaza and strategies to halt Israeli war crimes backed by the United States. Now, Israel called the decision deplorable, and Russia responded that they're trying to keep lines open to all parties to find a resolution here. Additionally, Hamas put out that in this meeting, or shortly after this meeting, that no hostages would be released until a ceasefire was arranged. And that ceasefire is also what Russia put forward in their Security Council resolution that was voted down earlier this week. So that seems to be the Russian line at this point: ceasefire, humanitarian aid, try to find an end to the fighting, whereas the United States line is much more eradicate Hamas, a ceasefire after the terrorist organization is eliminated. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. It's 7 to 10 of the top stories each week, along with a few podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.